Today we will explore together Japanese folklore, and we will understand what a yokai is. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Japanese folklore is filled with legends of supernatural, mysterious apparitions or phenomena. Now these are normally called yokai. Now to understand what a yokai is, we need to take into consideration that this word is indeed an umbrella term. In fact, when you talk about a yokai, you could be referring to a spirit, a demon, a god, or even animals and objects and natural phenomenon. Yokai are found in literature, and I'm talking about early literature. We find mentions of yokai in Heian Jidai works, and also Kamakura works and later works, of course, Edo Jidai and so forth. For example, some of the most famous ones would be mentioned even in the Nihon Shoki, in the Kojiki, and in many different kinds of monogatari. For example, even in the Pillow Book from say Shonagon, and the famous Murasaki Shikibu talked about yokai. And just to remind you who Murasaki Shikibu was, we're talking about the writer of the famous tale of Genji, or the Genji Monogatari. In fact, she does mention that in her times these spirits will be rather dreadful. We find mentions of the famous Oni in the Jigoku Zoji, which is basically the scroll of hell, as it could be translated. Now this is basically part of the Sutra of the World Arising, where 7 of the 16 lesser hells are described, and in these we find mentions of Oni. So these yokai, and they can also be called ayakashi or mamono, they can be mostly of 3 natures. They can be malevolent, they can be mischievous, or they can be bringers of good fortune. Now there are many different ways to classify, and some classify these kinds of apparitions. In fact, there are hundreds of different kinds, and today in this video I will mainly talk about the 3 most popular and most famous kinds of yokai. But if you're interested in this sort of topic, and if you're interested in classical and medieval Japanese folklore, then let me know with a comment. And if I find enough likes, and perhaps if you share this video and I see many views, then I could continue the series and present to you many other kinds of Japanese demons, monsters, spirits and gods. But for today we will mostly focus on the 3 most popular ones. But before getting to them, let's try to understand these sort of classifications of yokai. So folklorists, as for example Tsutomu Emma is one of these, normally classify them, and we find them that they are classified by their true form. We have 5 possibilities: human, animal, plant, object and natural phenomenon. Now when we say true form, is because often the sort of yokai that have the ability or magical ability of shape-shifting are normally classified as bakemono or obake, or sometimes henge, mutants. These 5 true forms. Then we have a sub-classification on 4 different yokai depending on how they mutated. So is their mutation this world related, spiritual or mental? Is it linked to reincarnation, or is it material related? Then we have 7 different ways that after they change their shape, how do they appear? Human, animal, plant, object, structure, so meaning building, or thing of nature, which actually is divided into several. But another form of classification, which we find in the book Sogo Nihon Minzoku Goi, is that yokai are divided depending on where they reportedly appear. We've got the Yama no Ke, or spirits of the mountain, Michi no Ke, spirits of the paths, Ki no Ke, spirits of wood or trees, Mizu no Ke, spirits of water, Umi no Ke, spirits of the sea, and I find it very interesting how they differentiate spirits of water from spirits of the sea, because the Japanese always had a very specific and very distinct way of dealing or considering and imagining things pertaining to the sea. We see this even in modern day Japanese horror films, where often they imagine all these malevolent beings coming out from the sea or lurking in the waters, waiting for travelers. And I think that this could have to do with the fact that Japan not only is a set of islands, so it's detached from mainland China, for example, but they have been a closed country politically during the time called Sakoku. Then we have the Yukinoke, the spirits of the snow, Otonoke, spirits of sound, and Dobutsunoke, the spirits of animals, which can be either real or imaginary. There is another way to classify them, and are they, again, malevolent, or are they beneficent, beneficial, positive, bringers of peace? The earlier would be called Ara Mitama. So these are the violent spirits, whereas the positive and peaceful spirits would be called Nigi Mitama. And for the Japanese, there is also a ritual which is called Chinkon, which is a ritual of, well, literally it means the calming of the spirits, and it's a ritual performed in order to change a Aramitama into a Nigimitama, so a violent spirit into a peaceful spirit. I think this is interesting because we see this in modern media as well. I mean, if you have ever played Final Fantasy X, Yuna, the main female protagonist, she performs a ritual to calm spirits and send. It's the sending, they call it, and so it's a way to send them to it. So it's slightly different, but send them to the next world. So it's slightly different, but I think that it is rooted, that game's lore is rooted in Japanese medieval, or feudal if you prefer, folklore. And please remember that although again, medieval, because that's where we mostly get our information, so from Kamakura period and Muromachi period, this is Japanese Middle Ages sort of, but many of these things are also found in Heian times, so classical. But another concept that it has to do with yokai is the concept of mononoke, and again, the mastermind and genius Miyazaki Hayao has produced a Mononoke Hime, or Princess Mononoke. What is a Mononoke? Mononoke, yes, it's a yokai, sort of. It could be translated as phantom, but I think a better translation would be spirit, because Mononoke can be seen also as a general term, meaning all the sort of spirits, or the spirit that inhabits or permeates all things. That is Mononoke. So that title is very deep, and again, rooted into Japanese traditional folklore. So the three sort of yokai that we will consider today in our study are the kappa, the tengu, and the oni. So these are very famous, of course. Let's begin from the kappa. In order to understand what a kappa is, we need to first choose what perspective we want to adopt. Because a kappa for the Shinto tradition is basically a suijin, so a god of water or spirit of water. Whereas if we look at it from a Buddhist point of view, a kappa is a kind of hungry ogre, so quite different. If we find a hairy version of a kappa, then it's called a hyosube. They are often depicted as having a small pool of water suspended over their head as a representation of their life force. Sometimes in some traditions they are considered that they can be positive, as one of the things they do, they supposedly do, is to warn children of the dangers lurking underwater. But other times, most times, they're considered to be malevolent spirits that try to lure people to the waters in order to drown them or do other horrible things to them. Tengu, literally, teng means heaven, in this case heavenly, and gu means dog. But if you think of what a tengu is and the shape it normally has, it doesn't look like a dog, does it? Now the reason is that this legendary creature, which is part of folk religion and Japanese folk religion, originated from a dog-like Chinese demon, which would be written with the same characters, but of course in Mandarin Chinese you would read it Tian-go, Tian-go. But upon reaching Japan, it changes. It had the form of birds of prey, and traditionally depicted with having both human and avian characteristics. Earlier, Tengu even had beaks, but then these change into very long noses, as having more of a human-like form, and normally their face being red, bright red. Traditionally, Buddhism considered them as being opponents. So they are traditional opponents of Buddhism, considered to be disruptive demons and harbingers of war. But this changed, and with time the figure of the Tengu sort of softened, although still remaining dangerous spirits, but they would be considered to be protective spirits, spirits which defend or protect mountains or forests. And in fact, they are often depicted together with Yamabushi. We find mentions of Tengu as early as the late Heian period in the Konjaku Monogatari Shu. They would mislead the pious with false images of the Buddha, seducing holy men, robbing temples, and endowing those who worship them with unholy power. And in Kamakura and Muromachi period, they start to be considered to be able to possess people, especially women and girls, and speak through their mouths. Oni are fascinating creatures. I've already talked about the Oni in my Kanabo dedicated video, which you will find in the description below. Kanabo being a very big club or blunt weapon used by the Japanese as an anti-armor weapon mostly. And they are often associated with the Oni because, as we know, Oni is a basically brutal, hideous, gigantic ogre-like creature which has sharp claws, hair and 2 long horns. And so having this a very strong image and possessing supernatural strength represented wielding these massive weapons. The skin can be of a number of colors, but red and blue are the most common. This image of the Oni, however, changed over time, as originally Oni were not physical creatures, and we can see this through the character used to represent them, because that character, which in Mandarin Chinese is pronounced Gui, originally meant ghost. So intending nebulous beings who could take a variety of forms, deceive and often devour humans. They were formless creatures, invisible, which eventually became anthropomorphized and took on this ogre-like form. One of the reasons probably is the syncretism with creatures imported by Buddhism, such as the Indian Rakshasa and Yakshasa, called Gaki. A fun fact is that in Japan there is a concept called the Kimon, or the demon gate, or the gate of Oni. And this is basically the north direction. The north direction, and again this originates in China, it's a concept which originates in China, but the north direction is considered to be an unlucky direction through which evil spirits passed. And this is why temples are often built facing the north direction, and Japanese buildings sometimes have L-shaped indentions to ward Oni away. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching as always, and thank you for your time. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. I will see you tomorrow for my next video, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. Sayonara.